Hey there, Lachlan from Xano here. And today I'm going to show you through the new DronaHQ integration that DronaHQ have finished building. And essentially, what's DronaHQ? Well, DronaHQ is a custom application builder, which basically allows you to build both internal and custom applications, particularly leveraging Xano in a very easy fashion. They've got a whole bunch of different UI building blocks, which make kind of building out your interface quite easy. A really nice table function, which I want to show you in a moment. They've also got a whole range of different workflow actions as well. So when a user clicks on a button, what's that supposed to do? Now, what we'll be building today is a CRM. We'll be leveraging the Metadata API, which is essentially what this connector is able to do. So the DronaHQ will be able to interact with your instance via the Metadata API. And they've actually built out every single available function that exists in Metadata API you'll be able to access inside DronaHQ. So that's accessing your database tables, whether it be reviewing them, updating them, files, functions, request history, so on. Anything you can see in the Metadata API, you'll be able to then access inside of DronaHQ. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is head across to our account section in our Xano instance. We're going to create a new Metadata API access token. So when you create your access token, ensure to provide the required scopes. I'm going to give it all access, so create, read, update, and delete. And something to note is once we create this, the access token, which we're going to copy into DronaHQ, make sure if you want to use this somewhere else, you store it somewhere securely because you won't be able to see this token again here in the screen. Now, heading across back to DronaHQ, we're going to start a brand new application. I'm going to work from a template. So there's a whole range of different templates you can select. I'm going to use this CRM template today. Now, once you click use this template, it'll essentially produce this brand new workspace for you to start working in. And a quick lay of the land, DronaHQ allows you to first configure which screen you're on. So it comes with all these pre-built screens in the template. We've then got controls or UI blocks that you can then place onto your screen. Data queries. So what information are we actually going to pull? And we're going to use Xano to basically access the data. And then we have some rules and validations and our connector library. Now, what DronaHQ have done is they've built a custom connector, which we can then use to make data queries. So first we're going to add this connector. If we click add one at the top here, we're then able to search for Xano. And we're going to create a new connection. You call this whatever you like. And you're just going to paste in that metadata API access token and click save once you've done that. Now that we've got our data connector added, we're able to now do some data queries and return some data onto our page. So if we head across to our data queries, what we can do here is we can add a new data query, and we're going to access our connector library. Within our connector library, we can see all the different metadata API methods that we can use. And for this one, we're looking to access some table data from Xano. So if I quickly scoot across to Xano, you can see I've actually got a contacts table set up, which funnily enough has the exact same data structure as what the template in DronaHQ has. What a coincidence. But I have some slightly different data here where I've just changed the first name of this contact from Arthur to Bob. And essentially, I'm going to be pulling this data in, which we can see is table 291, and display that inside the table in DronaHQ. Okay, now back in Drona, we're able to access our data queries again. And from our library, we're going to select the get table contents because we're going to return those contacts by that query. So first thing, we can define which environments we want to access this connector access. We're going to have set it for all of our different environments. And now what's really cool about this integration is we're able to actually just from this list, select which instance first do we want to get the data from. We then can define the workspace and then the contacts table. So once we've selected the correct table in the right workspace, I can then test to see what data we're getting. And we can see I've got contacts that I showed inside my Xano table here with the contact Bob Dole being the first one instead of Arthur. So we're ready to now actually add this to our table. So if we get rid of our data queries for a moment, head across to our table grid, we can see that currently the data we've got here, it's just using the static data that's provided as the demo that you get as part of the template. So if we get rid of this dummy data here, what we're able to do is then basically add our data query data. So the response we just received back. If I add the entire response, you can see that we've got these objects which isn't quite right. We actually, if we have a look back at our response here, we've got our items as our object, and then we have the array of context within the items. So inside of this here, we could actually go data queries and then items. But we've also got an issue where this isn't working as well. So what can we do to manipulate this data? Well, we can actually control what the response from this request is, and we can manipulate how we want it to display. So what I mean by that is we can actually take this response we've received here in our data query, and then we can transform the response into the required format for the table. So how we can do that is going to write some JavaScript, and it's really straightforward. We're going to return in this item the data and .items, which is going to contain the array we want. So if we run this JavaScript here, all of a sudden we've now just got the array containing the context, which is what we're wanting to display in our table. So we can now also update our data query to just be the table content. And if I update my data query correctly, we now have our contacts displayed in our table here. We've also got Bob Dole being the contact here. So now that we've got this mapped, we can start to update some of the other fields in this CRM as well. So what's kind of cool is I can now preview this data, and what DronaHQ actually does is whatever JSON structure you provide it, it generates this awesome table, which is actually searchable out of the box. So I don't need to add any custom filtering on the backend in Xano. I can start to search by contact's name, and we've now got filtering and searching built into the table element itself. It even defined all these items just based on the JSON object structure that we gave it. So when we select different items in our table, we see all these buttons here that we want to be able to then do something with. So if we edit the details here, how can I then update this contact? So let's look at how we can then add the next structure. So we're going to now add a new contact, and we need to work out how can we do that. So built into this table grid, we can see at the top here, there's actually an add contact button. So we can actually check the actions that have happened for this particular item by checking the events that we can see here. And currently we've got 3 different actions. And we can see on add click here, we've got this add function, which is going to open up a screen 9, which is basically a slide out panel to add a new contact. So if we get out of that navigator and we head across to our screens, we can head to our preflow editor here, which we can see as screen 9. And we're now able to basically create a workflow for this slide out, which we can then add a contact. And first thing we look at is each individual block here has its own unique name. So we can see contact name is actually contact name 1. This is important because we want to be able to reference this when we're trying to bind this data to our event, which is going to update or add a new contact to our database. So when we click this add button, we can define some events that we want to have happen on click. So we can see here with this button click that we're going to create a new item essentially on this create table function. So how did I add this? Basically through my connectors here, I went to server-side actions, then I searched for Xano, and I basically selected the create an item in table action. Now, when we start to configure this, we're able to, again, select which environments we want this to be accessible in, and then choose which instance, workspace, which I've already done. Now we're able to dynamically map those items from our form to this request. So we can see here this company name, 1, is identical to that unique name that we saw in that form just a moment ago. So after binding all of these items to the page, or to our request here, we're then going to continue and finish off this request. So inside our create table, we then have this toast function, which is going to appear basically our changes added successfully. Then we're going to return back to home. So if we now exit this and we go into our preview mode, we can have a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to head to add, contact, and we're just going to do an email here for @email.com. So now when we add this, looking for Lachlan email.com, we can see that we haven't refreshed the item, but if we refresh this item just now, you can see we've now got sample company and Lachlan email at email.com. So we've created an action based on a new screen that we've added. Now, maybe we want to also update the values for a particular row. So we want to update, say, the status. So we can choose what status do we want to have appear. We can also choose what notes or that we want to update as well. So we're able to update this contact by basically creating an action when we click this update status button. And we're kind of wanting to get this lead status. So checking out this particular item, we can see that the unique name is lead status 2. This is going to give us our new updated data. And then when we access or click the button update status, we want to then basically trigger the update to the table. So this time we're going to also add a data connector item. So if I server-side actions, then Xano, I'm going to select update table. And I've pre-configured my environments and also selected my correct table again. And this time we're actually able to reference what the current item is. And our grid, if you may remember, is called table grid 1. We can then reference the ID as the current item that's selected's ID. This will currently render to ID number 1. We're then able to also match the other table details to the information that's stored or returned from the API already. So we can get the table grid's company name, contact, etc. Except for our lead status. Now, our lead status is going to be new content that the user is going to update. And then when they click the button, we want that to be added to our table. So I'm going to add that unique value for the lead status 2. So we're going to update that bit of content. Now, this time, we also want to make sure that when we update the content, we don't want to have to make the user click the refresh button. So what we can also do is we can also run a data query as another item, which basically we can select that get table content data query request. So after we've updated the contact with the new lead status, we're then going to refresh that table and return that data on page. So we test this out now when we decide to select the user. So Warner Bros, John Travolta, and he's no longer a lead. We've now won that lead. So if I update the status, we can now see that it's updated the data and John Travolta status is now set to 1. So that's using the Metadata API and some of the inbuilt functions that are available, but sometimes you want to be able to use your custom APIs that you build as well. So now we're going to explore how can you then access those custom APIs inside of DronaHQ. Great, so now we're ready to tackle the last challenge, which is to contact securely a custom API that's been built inside Xano. We can see here we've got an API that has authentication enabled. And Xano has its own authentication system, but so does DronaHQ. DronaHQ actually manages your users on behalf of you. So if we're just using the Xano connector, there's no need to set up single sign-on, but if we want to securely have users access our Xano APIs, we're going to use the single sign-on configuration. And we're using a JWT type of authentication, and we're going to be able to set up this JWT token exchange as an API inside of Xano. So accessing the details, you'll see there's a secret key and a secret ID, which we'll store inside of Xano. And what will going to happen is when a user tries to log in with a particular domain, being Xano.com, we want to make sure that this instead uses our custom sign-on that we set up to basically sign the user in and get a authentication token from Xano as well. So how we can do this is you'll see when we try and type in a particular user, we're then greeted with this login via Xano auth option. This now triggers a custom page that I've set up elsewhere. And when I log a user in, what's actually happening behind the scenes is we're contacting Xano and we're getting an auth token for this user. It now signs the user in and we're able to access the auth token variable that was passed across as part of the login exchange. So what's actually happening there is the way we've done this is I basically customized the general login flow. And just like usual, we're taking an email and a password, we're logging the user in and we're providing an auth token. But different to a normal login process where we're just returning this auth token, we're actually encoding this value and we're creating a JWT token that the DronaHQ login process is actually invoking. So if we go into this particular field here, we can see we're actually creating our own custom JWT token using this JWS encode function. And we're able to set the details, including the secret ID of the from DronaHQ, the username of the user, the email. We're also able to bring across the auth token. Why this is important is we need to know the auth token of the user to make sure we can securely access the APIs inside of Xano. So looking a little bit about how we've done this is you'll get a bunch of code from DronaHQ's documentation when you're setting up your JWT single sign-on. And what we're looking for is we're going to basically swap out where it makes a request to the traditional API, and we're going to instead insert our Xano API here, which is going to essentially return that JWT token when this gets called. What this page actually looks like is just a simple login screen, and we're having the action on login basically trigger this JWT token get from our API. Now, what then happens is once we've been able to set up this process and we can log a user in, we're now actually ready to configure our API requests inside of DronaHQ. So going into one of the applications of our logged a user in, what we're able to do is we're able to start to configure a connector. So inside our connectors, I'm going to jump into an application. So to configure a connector, we're able to see that essentially inside of our connector library, we can set up our own custom connector. We're going to use the REST API connector for this process. Now, to set this up, we need to first make sure we've logged a user in successfully, because we need to access some variables of a user that we've passed across as part of that single sign-in method. Now, inside of that connector, we want to use the multi-step authentication process. And this is going to allow us to access some of the variables we received as part of the sign-on process. So we're actually taking this token. We can see that we have some particular output variables that we can access. What we now need to do is we're actually taking the response. And what we're going to do is we're basically needing to pass the access token from the response we've received. And the reason we're doing this is we're actually receiving back a string. We need to make sure that we can pass this string to basically make sure we can actually access the correct auth token that we sent across as part of our request. Now, once we've configured this, we're also then going to be using the output variable. So what this is actually creating is when we're taking the output result, it's going to then return this variable, which we can access, which is going to contain the auth token of the user, which we're going to pass across in our headers. So how we can do this is down the bottom here, we've got our authorization bearer, and it's the JS code to output is what we're going to be passing across. Now what this is doing is basically it's set up this authentication process for our APIs, and we're able to use a test API down the bottom here to make sure that we're actually getting a result back. You can now see that we've got a result that's returned the information that we need. So what does this mean? What this now means is that we've got our connectors set up. We can now actually add additional APIs to this process. So just like before, we had a contacts API. How we can access that is we can copy this endpoint URL. And then inside of Drona, we're able to essentially take this path and paste it in. And what this is going to use, it's going to use the current user's logged in access token when it makes this request. So when we test this item, we can now see we've actually got all these items back, and we've used the correct authentication token to access the data. So closing the loop, what we've gone through here is how to access the new DronaHQ connector, which gives you access to all your metadata requests. And then we also then have our Xano APIs as well, which is where we're able to set up our own custom single sign-on and securely access our custom APIs as well via the single sign-on process. Hopefully this has given you some insights into how you can get started using DronaHQ, and I look forward to your feedback in the comments below.